What on earth was that? Welcome back to the final week of the Acolyte. However, it seems like based on what just happened, it might not be the final week. Just a huge heads up, spoilers for the Acolyte episode 8 if you haven't seen it already. I'm going to talk about everything and the Acolyte overall. Also, you might have seen over on my Instagram or somewhere else, I was just in LA for Star Wars Outlaws and also to go to Galaxy's Edge, Disneyland, Star Wars Land. Had a great time. I'm going to be posting more on Instagram soon about the event and then sharing more about Star Wars Outlaws soon over on my main channel. Also right now, you may have noticed this isn't my normal room. I'm in Argentina. I'm visiting some friends. If you want to see more of my adventures over the next few weeks from Argentina, then also please come follow me on Instagram. I'm in Argentina. I'm trying empanadas for the first time. It's hot. We have so much to talk about, so many reveals in the Acolyte final episode, and it feels like it's left way more questions unanswered than it has answered questions. What am I, Yoda? Am I speaking like Yoda? Speaking of which, yes, we did get the Yoda cameo. Even though he didn't speak, even though he wasn't in it for really long at all, he was the end of the series. We saw the back of Yoda's head, which I was kind of hoping they wouldn't do, to be honest, just because I feel like these kinds of cameos cheapen the show a little bit. But obviously they're trying to connect the Acolyte to the larger Star Wars world, the larger Star Wars audience, and therefore they're bringing Yoda into the context of this to show us that yes, he is of course indeed around at this time. There's definitely quite a bit I'm disappointed about with this finale and with the Acolyte overall, but first of all, I just want to go over all the positive things that we got in this episode. Because honestly, I think there is quite a lot to be excited about here. And the first of those is the massive reveal in this episode of Darth Plagueis. Yes, that is confirmed, Darth Plagueis. He's got the creepy hand, grabbing onto the wall there. And honestly, he does look a little different to how he did in Star Wars Legends. Plagueis is of course already in the new Star Wars canon, considering he was mentioned in Revenge of the Sith, and has also been mentioned several other times in other Star Wars media. However, this is the first time we are seeing him in the new Star Wars canon, and his appearance is a little bit different to what it was in Star Wars Legends. So clearly Disney are willing to further develop his plot and his connection to Osha, May, Chimere, and everything else that's going on in the Acolyte. He's connected to this time period, and the show creators are trying to connect the dots between the Acolyte and the High Republic era to the era of the prequels and the Clone Wars. And I guess Palpatine's origin stories as well, which it feels like is potentially on the cards at this point. The fact we're seeing Darth Plagueis mentioned and we're seeing him involved in Star Wars means at some point we could potentially be seeing specifically how the events of Palpatine's upbringing and introduction to the Force, how he becomes a Sith Lord, and then how he eventually kills Darth Plagueis, his master, happens. One thing I do honestly appreciate about this episode is that they tied up the loose end of Ki-Adi-Mundi's mention of this in the prequels, where he said,
"Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium."
We saw that Master Venestra blamed everything on Sol, said that he acted alone, that he went rogue, killed all the other Jedi, and even though I think she suspects there is something else going on, has decided to pin this whole thing on Sol, as opposed to mentioning the Stranger, Chimere, or anyone else. Now this was my take from this, perhaps she doesn't know, but my take was that she's doing this to somehow protect May. So basically the rest of the Jedi Council and the Senate aren't going to learn of the existence of Chimere, of the Rule of Two, and the fact that there is indeed a Sith Lord out there working in the shadows. They're gonna stay in the shadows for now, it seems. Okay, so I've just realized Venestra actually blamed Sol for everything to cover up the shame of her apprentice turning to the dark side. Her Padawan is obviously Chimere. We got a hint of that as she set foot on the planet and sensed something, and also when she looked up to where Chimere was previously standing. So clearly she's acting completely selfishly and emotionally. The fact she's covering this up, the fact she is hiding this from the High Council, which is clearly the reason they don't find out about the existence of the Sith at this point. Now, one element of this episode that I think is going to be quite controversial is the memory wipe of May. The way Chimere was able to use the Force to basically wipe her memory. She's just left with, I guess, blurry memories from her childhood and her past. She doesn't really remember that she has a sister. She doesn't remember that, I guess, she's been trained in the ways of the Force, and the fact she's killed multiple Jedi. Now, before you go ahead and say that this Force ability doesn't exist in Star Wars canon, you might forget that it did already happen in the Mortis arc of the Clone Wars. The Force ability is known as a memory rub or a memory wipe, which basically alters and erases memories and skills through the use of the Force. Honestly, it was kind of strange seeing this ability used so simply and so quickly by Chimera. He just waved his hand and then suddenly her memories were gone. But at the end of the day, it seems like Darth Plagueis is, after all, his master, and the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. So with that in mind, it's not too much of a stretch, I guess. Now, the lightsaber duel between Chimera and Sol is easily one of the best we've had in recent years, possibly in the entire Disney Star Wars era. The only problem for me, was that it was too short. There were so many cool, small moments in this though. The fact Chimera went from using a single-bladed to the dual-wield, back to a single-bladed, the way they used the Force at certain moments, the kicks. And I honestly really enjoyed the slow motion effects used in this duel for stylization purposes. That's something we really haven't seen too much of in Star Wars lightsaber choreography, as I think it's quite a specific stylistic choice. I think the prequels are really grounded in realism, which is why there's none of this, I guess, trickery going on. It's all kind of live and done at a fast speed. Whereas this duel felt a lot more samurai influenced, and I was getting heavy Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon vibes. Really honing in on Sol's unique samurai technique as well. I really enjoyed his dueling style and it felt original for Star Wars. Really wanted to see more of this. It was a shame we didn't get to see more. Also interesting that Chimera didn't really use his Cortosis helmet or arm brace during any of this duel. He was kind of just forced to use his lightsabers. And also interesting that Sol was able to match him in this duel. Is Sol just a more powerful Jedi? How did Chimera go from taking out that whole group of Jedi to then struggling to fight and basically be disarmed and defeated by Sol? Another thing I really appreciated about this episode was the inquest from Rayan Court into the Jedi Order, which is requesting an external review of the Jedi, basically suggesting they're too violent and can't be trusted because they can get emotional, which is definitely what we saw in this series. I really appreciate that they're delving into this side of Star Wars, that people do question the power the Jedi hold, and this conversation was honestly really tense. It was funny how in this context, Venestra seemed like a villain, like she had something to hide, and like she was threatening Rayan Court with her power. Kind of scary stuff, because at any point the Jedi could use their powers to just kill anyone, as we've seen in other parts of Star Wars, I guess. They're dangerous, and they wield lightsabers that cut people up into little pieces. Okay, before we get to the bulk of the negative stuff, I just wanted to mention how I thought it was funny Sol kept shouting, "Rey!" which immediately to me sounded like Finn shouting, "Rey! Rey!" Okay, one other thing that I appreciated is that Sol's character is trying to do what he must to preserve his lies. He was willing to shoot down May after she escaped. And if Basil hadn't disabled the ship, he likely would have shot her down. But at the same time, I'm like, why did Basil do this? What's his stake in this? Did he just not want to see another death? I mean, in some ways, you could now argue Basil is responsible for Sol's death, which I'm honestly kind of disappointed that Sol died, but at the same time, he kind of needed to. Which brings me to my criticisms of this episode and of the series as a whole. Personally, I just haven't really been that invested in the overall story of the twins. Even though they're the two leading protagonists in the series, for me, they're two of the least interesting characters in the show. And I understand that Sol has now explained how they came to be, how they were created through a vergence in the Force by Mother Anastasia, and the Force cult of witches who were able to access this power. But I'm honestly just not that interested in their character arc. Clearly there is dark within both of them, and they've switched roles as opposed to what was happening at the start of the series where May was the evil one and Osha was the good. It seems like Osha has just completely flipped and turned to the dark side almost too easily. But I can't help but make the comparison with Anakin, which is kind of frustrating at the same time. Anakin, some people argued back in the day, and still to this day, that he turned to the dark side too easily. That losing Padme and his mother perhaps wasn't enough for him to turn. I kind of completely disagree with that. I think there was heaps of motivation here because he was doing everything for love, but at the same time, you know, he went from being a Jedi to slaughtering all the children for the sake of love. It's kind of messed up, but also not completely out of reach. Whereas with Osha, she kind of just turns after learning that Sol is the one who killed her mother. Kind of cool that we got the first on-screen lightsaber bleeding in the process of this, where a Force user channels the dark side through rage to turn the crystal of the lightsaber they possess red. It was cool seeing this happen and the lightsaber become possessed, but my opinion of Osha's turn to the dark side is just kind of weak. Her character has completely flipped, and I guess her and May have changed and swapped characters, which is kind of the idea of this. You also saw them swap colors at the end of the show. May is the one who's wearing the lighter clothes, whereas Osha is wearing the darker, but their personalities have completely swapped. But perhaps this is what the directors and the writers are trying to get across here, that they are indeed the same person, created through the Vergence in the Force. They are one and the same and interchangeable at any time, and therefore can switch like this. I guess it is a unique concept in Star Wars. It's still, for me, not that believable though, and just honestly not that interesting. Totally fine if you have a different opinion about this, but their character motivations, for me, are just a little bit weak. I also don't really get how Osha goes to literally killing Sol, choking him through the use of the Force, and once again we're getting the mirroring of what Anakin did to Padme. Yes, that was over love, but at the same time you could argue that this was love, Osha's love for her mother, and Sol lying to her for so many years. At the same time, I feel like she should be able to see that Sol does have the greater good in mind. He is looking out for both May and Osha in this sense, and yes, had to make some really hard decisions and did a terrible thing, but at the end of the day, I don't think is a bad person. But I guess you could also honestly argue against that, considering he was pretty much ready to shoot down May in the ship when he activated the targeting system. Was stopped by Basil. Basil's the hero or the villain after all. Maybe Basil is the Sith Lord behind everything, let's be real. I want to mention this again as well. There's definitely something weird going on between Osha and Chimere, because there's definitely some level of sexual tension here. And I think this is the intention. He has completely swapped his approach to teaching a pupil or an apprentice. With May, he didn't even show his face, but with Osha, he left absolutely nothing to the imagination. We remember what happened a few episodes ago. And we see Osha and Chimere holding hands at the end looking out to the sunset, as Darth Plagueis creepily watches them from a cave. Also, can someone explain to me what happened at the start of this episode involving Osha, Chimere, and the helmet? To me, it looked like Osha was being possessed by the dark magic of the witches. It was the dark side manifesting in her, and this also bled out into Chimere, which is why his eyes changed color. The scene was kind of trippy and connected to the witches' use of the thread or the force or whatever the dark magic they're using is called. But it was interesting seeing the way this manifested. I also don't really like the way the other Jedi are portrayed in this series. They just kind of seem lame, like they're just a bunch of people standing around, each of a different species and look to them. And they just don't have the same presence as the Jedi of the prequels did. I don't know if this is just because they're not the High Council members, but the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, as we've seen it in this series, feels really small and low budget for some reason. Considering the show had a budget of $180 million, I don't know why the Jedi Temple looks like this. Were there no opportunities to do some larger, longer shots? The reason the Jedi Temple worked so well and we thought there were so many Jedi in the prequels was because almost every time we saw shots from the interior of the Jedi Temple, there were these huge, wide open hallways, the Jedi walking down, having a conversation. We saw the scale and the grandeur of the place, which is what this is all about. However, in this series, the Jedi Temple has been reduced to these small rooms with strange colored walls. A bit disappointed about this. Now, I also think there is a huge chance that the potential season 2 of The Acolyte, which looks like it's very much on the cards now considering how this series ended, will get cancelled. This has been, as far as I've seen, the least popular Star Wars series to date. And if not the least popular, it's certainly been the most controversial. Perhaps they'll try and adapt these characters and this series into something else. Perhaps it will evolve out of what it is. But it's so clear the intention here was to set up a second series. And we were right after all. They never intended to resolve everything in the final episode. We knew they'd run out of time, and yes, once again, they've left more questions than answers. Honestly, the only things they really wrapped up was what happened all the way back on Brendok and Sol's fate. What happens to him in the end? It's kind of disappointing that this is where it's at. Also, the thing is, if we get a second season, it could be years away. Considering it seems years to take these Star Wars shows, by the time we get a series 2, it's probably going to be like 2027 or 2028 with, we got Skeleton Crew coming potentially later this year, then Andor, Mandalorian movie, and whatever else is currently in development. So this feels like it would be way down the track. I'm also looking at doing a full review of The Acolyte over on my main channel in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. But please let me know what you thought of The Acolyte as a series overall. Did you enjoy it? What did you not like about it? What did you like about it? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to come follow me on Instagram, Twitter for more from my travels as well. And thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.